the meeting to order. We were 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. An executive session for personnel items. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, sorry. My mistake. I was going to change it up. Number 1 through 5, we'll read tomorrow night as presented. Yeah, there's my first kick for doing something wrong. Number 6, do we have anything for agenda items in public comment? Nothing. Okay, go right into athletics and recreation. Mr. Renzi.
Athletics and recreation, fall supplements. Request approval of the 2022-2023 fall supplemental athletic contracts pending solicitor review as attached. I so move.
No questions, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Okay, letter B, award spring bids. Request approval to award bids for spring sports supplies and equipment to the lowest responsible bidder, meeting specifications. I so move.
No questions or objections, we'll add that to the agenda.
Letter C, request approval for Richard Evans, athletic director, to attend the Pennsylvania State Athletic Directors Association 54th Annual Conference, Hershey, PA, Tuesday through Friday, March 15th through March 18th, 2022, at no cost to the district, in accordance with the district travel policy.
No questions or objections, we'll add that to the agenda.
Letter D, Collinsville Lions Club, 21 stadium report. See the attachment.
We'll add that to the agenda. Also like to thank them for the report.
Letter E, athletic committee meeting. An athletic meeting was held on Thursday, June 13th, 2022. That's all I have.
Okay, buildings and grounds, Mr. Layton.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval of the following events and building use requests subject to adherence to the district's health and safety plan and all the applicable state and federal laws and orders, including any mandatory or recommended cancellations, rescheduling, or postponement. And on the condition that requesters provide an event to use specific health and safety plan acceptable to the district. Any rescheduling or postponement shall be the sole discretion of the district and under such terms and conditions that may be set forth by this district. And with no objections, I'll spread 1 through 5. I'll read them Wednesday. We'll place them on the agenda.
No questions or objections, we'll add that to the agenda. Thank you.
Just one question, Mr. President.
Yes.
Under that agreement we have here, the statement was just read, in the event that hopefully it doesn't happen, but we would have to cancel, anybody that's putting money down, is that they get reimbursement on that?
Reimbursement if it's not done? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Donation of the Collinsville Area School District no longer in use vehicles, 1999 Jeep Cherokee and a 2003 Dodge Ram 2500 to the Career and Technical Center for use in the welding and auto mechanic classes. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the following addition to the substitute custodian list for the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
We'll have that placed on the agenda.
And hot water tanks. Request approval to purchase and install 2 hot water tanks at Dunbar Township Elementary School from John Hall Incorporated, Ligonier, PA, at a cost of $40,725 per PostStars 143428 to be paid from the Capital Reserve Fund. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
We'll have that placed on the agenda.
Mr. Mortucci, you have anything else?
No, sir.
Mr. Kirsch?
No, thank you.
That's all we have, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Carnegie Free Library, Mr. Montiel.
We don't have anything on the agenda for this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montiel. Colesville Area Career and Technical Center, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval of the pathway agreement between the Pittsburgh College of Technology and the Colesville Area Career and Technical Center effective January 20th, 2022. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
No questions or objections, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to accept a monetary donation of $50 for the CACTC cosmetology class from Colesville Moose. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
And request approval for Justin Striner, instructor, to attend the planning meeting for the heavy equipment competition, Shippensburg, PA, February the 2nd, 2022, an approximate cost of $340 for one substitute and travel to be paid from the office of the principal. B1382 staff requested. And no questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Mrs. Sangston, do you have anything to add?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. James? He's not here. That's all we have, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Moving to curriculum, Mr. Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Item 11A, we're going to table that until next month. We have a few changes to make and some discussion on it. 11B, Colesville Area Middle School course description. Request approval for the middle school course descriptions for the 22-23 school year. No questions or objections. I'd like that placed on the agenda.
I have a question.
Yes.
Question?
Is it possible I could get a copy of that before I go home?
Yeah, I can get you a copy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing any other questions or objections? Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda, and we'll make sure that Mrs. Sangston gets her copy so she can review it.
Item 11C, travel. In accordance with policy number 431, request approval of the following professional employee travel. Jenny Becker, teacher, to attend the Math Coach Network 2022 Allegheny Intermediate Unit, January 21st and March 4th, 2022, at a cost of $179.51 for 2 half-day subs. This is staff requested. No questions or objections? I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Item 2, Lauren Colson, teacher, to attend the Student Assistant Program, SAP, Winter Dramatic Workshop, St. Vincent College, February 1st, 2022, at an approximate cost of $220 for registration and substitute. Staff requested. No questions or objections? I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
11B committee meeting was held January 5th at 8 a.m. That's all I have, Mr. Renzi. Mr. Mondell. Dr. Coons. Thank you. That's all we have, Mr. Panzella.
Thank you, Mr. Harshman. Moving to cyber, Mr. Martre.
Thank you. We have nothing this evening. Mr. Montiel, anything to add?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Ghost? That's all we have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Martre. Moving to federal programs, Mr. Montiel.
Thank you. Request the approval to purchase a 2-year license for Delta Math Integral at a cost of $4,800 to be paid from ESSER funds. And without questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Item 13B is we did have a committee meeting that was held on January 5th, 2022. And that's all we have. Mr. Martucci, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Mr. Martre?
No,
thank you.
Mrs. Coons?
I have nothing, thank you.
That's all we have, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montiel. Moving to finance, Mr. Renzi.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pansella. District orders need request approval of the attached requisitions from November 23rd, 2021 through January 14th, 2022, which are already processed due to time constraints as per December 1st, 2021 board approval. Any questions or objectives? Please add to the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Okay, letter B, district credit card orders. Request approval of the attached district credit card orders from November 23rd, 2021 through January 14th, 2022, which are already processed due to time constraints as per December 1st, 2021 board approval. Any questions or objectives? Please add that to the agenda.
Hearing none, we will add that to the agenda.
Okay. Opt-out resolution, request approval of the accelerated budget opt-out resolution certifying tax rate without inflation index and no need to comply with Act 1 accelerated budget procedures for the 2022-2023 school year as proposed. Any objections or any questions or objections? Please add that to the agenda. If not,
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
okay. Letter D, PASBO conference. Request approval from Marlene Brunel and Sheree Rouson to attend the 67th Annual PASBO Conference, Hershey, PA, March 8th through March 11th, 2022, at an approximate cost of $2,300 for registration, lodging, meals, travel as budgeted. No questions or objections? Please add that to the agenda.
Question,
Question?
who's going to be running the show with them two going? Hope we don't have nothing big come up with both of them. Both of them here.
They'll have to keep their phones close and we'll hope they hurry back safely.
Letter E.
One question,
Yes, Mr. Mortry.
14C, does anybody know what, I know we got the accelerated rate, this is 4.9%, does anybody know what the inflation index was, what percentage it was? Anybody have any idea? This is, Brunel's not here, right?
She's not here.
Okay.
I'm here. I know that our rate is 4.9. I can get off the top of my head what the base rate was.
What was the inflation rate?
I'm not sure. I forget.
Okay, I think last year it was almost 7%, I don't know what it is this year. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Okay, letter E, we have a committee meeting will be held January 14th, 2022 at 1:30. Any questions or objections? If not, please add that to the agenda.
Hearing none, we will add that.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Mr. Lake?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Harshman?
Nothing, thank you.
Mrs. Brunel? I want to apologize for misreading that the first time. That was my first time. I didn't know what I was supposed to read. No one can get mixed up on it. But I corrected her real quick. I'm a fast learner.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Renzi. Moving to food service, Mrs. Sangston.
Thank you, Mr. Pansella. Request approval to eliminate a 4-hour position at the senior high. No questions or objections, I'd like that added.
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
Request approval to change a 4-hour position to a 5-hour position. No questions or objections, I'd like that added. Well, I have one thing to say. Ms. Basinger, can we put on there where that position is? Just so everybody knows, that's all. So that would be at the senior high. No, that's okay, just so everybody knows. Thank you. No questions or objections, I'd like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, and good catch on that, Mrs. Sangston. We will add that to the agenda.
Request approval of the following addition to the cafeteria substitute list for the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections, I'd like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
We had a committee meeting on January 10th at 6:30. That's all I have. Mr. Martrek?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Basinger, you have anything else?
Nothing, but I won't be here tomorrow night, so is there any question, anything?
Anybody have any
No,
questions?
no. We
thank you, Mrs. Sangston. Moving to personnel and review and liaison, Mr. Layton.
Thank you, Mr. Panzel. Request approval of the agreement, settlement agreement of case number 2-2021. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
16B, sabbatical. Request approval for a teacher to take a sabbatical leave of absence, second semester of the 2021-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing no questions or objections, we'll add that to the agenda.
Request approval for a teacher to take sabbatical leave for absence of the second semester of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
Request approval for an administrator to take intermittent unpaid leave of absence during the 21-22 school year, not to exceed 60 days. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for a teacher to take an intermittent unpaid leaves of absence during the 21-22 school year, not to exceed 60 days. And no questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
We'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval for a teacher to take intermittent unpaid days of the remainder of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for a teacher to take unpaid leave of absence for the second semester of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for a teacher to take an unpaid leave of absence for the second semester of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Have that added to the agenda.
Request approval to hire as a long-term substitute for STEM K-6 for the second semester of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for an aide to take intermittent unpaid days of the remainder of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for an aide to take leave of absence for the remainder of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
We'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval for an aide to take intermittent unpaid days for the remainder of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval for an aide to take a leave of absence beginning January the 3rd, 2022 until or on or about February 22nd, 2022. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval of the following additions to the support professional substitute list for the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
We'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the following additions to the professional substitute list for the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that added to the agenda.
Request approval to accept the retirement of a maintenance person effective March the 25th, 2022. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to accept the retirement of an instructor effective the end of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval for as a substitute co-director of Buildings and Grounds as needed. Let's see. How was I supposed to do it? As needed, with
No cost to the
voluntarily and no cost to the district. Does that sound right, Mr. Wood?
So that motion should be as needed on a voluntary basis and no cost to the district.
Okay, so it's all right. Vicki, you understand?
Yes.
Get with Tim if you get it correct. With no questions or objections like I placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to change the title Assistant to the Superintendent for Finance and Operations to Business Manager effective immediately. No questions or objections like I placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, I'll have that placed on the agenda.
It was effective immediately. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to appoint Cherie Routson as the interim business manager. Too late now. In the absence of the business manager with a per diem stipend of $100 effective as needed for the remainder of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
I have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to hire as a personal student aide effective December the 1st, 2021. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request approval to hire as a personal student aide effective January 18th, 2022. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
And request approval to hire a long-term substitute for Clifford and Fritz Elementary for the second semester of the 21-22 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
And just for informational purposes, we had a committee meeting was held on January 10th, 2022 at 1 p.m. That's all we have, Mr. Panzel. Please, do your pledge.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Moving to policy and legislative, Mr. Martre.
Thank you, Mr. Panzo. Under 17A, the policy additions, this one, which would be policy 304.2, 404.2, 504.2, we're going to table that for further review by our solicitor. No questions or objections, like just remove that for Wednesday evening. Then 17B, the first reading for policy revisions. Request approval of the first reading of the following revised policies: 317, conduct disciplinary procedures; 417, conduct disciplinary procedures; 517, conduct disciplinary procedures; and 348.1, bullying and cyberbullying and harassment. Same for 448.1 and 548.1 as well. And if there's no questions or objections, I'd like to have that placed on the agenda.
I have a question.
Question?
Can we see those new policies?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Question?
Since we tabled the 304, 404, and 504 for the first reading, why are we not canceling the 317, 417, 517, and so forth on these policies?
Mr. Solicitor?
This is just the first reading one.
Yeah, that's, so they address different requirements, and so they are not interrelated in that sense. So it is possible to move forward on the second set of 6 there, and not the first 3. Unless there, once again, is a specific issue or something that the board would have a question on with respect to those particular policies, and then if it's the board's wish, this could be tabled as well.
All right, thank you.
We don't get to look at them before we vote on it. And how are we going to have any questions or change it?
So yeah, those policies should be made available to all the board members prior to being requested to vote on them. If you haven't received them, we'll certainly make sure you get those policies to review in advance.
Thank you.
Any other questions on 17B?
Our committee meeting was held January 5th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Mr. Mongiel, you have anything to add?
Nothing, thanks.
Mr. Horsham?
Nothing, thanks.
Mr. Bradley?
No, thank you.
That's all we have.
Thank you, Mr. Martre. Moving to safety and security, Mr. Martucci.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. I have nothing at this time. Mr. Lindsay, you have anything to add?
I have nothing.
Mr. Carmack, that's all we have, Mr. Panzella.
Thank you, Mr. Martucci. Sticking with you on special education.
Okay, thanks again. And then we have, as a committee meeting held January 13th, 2022 at 6 p.m. And Mr. Lake, do you have anything to add?
Nothing, thank you.
Mrs. Sangston
Nothing, thank you.
and Mr. D'Amico. That's all, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. Martucci. Moving to student services, Mrs. Sangston.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Request approval of the following additions for the 21-22 Collins Ferry High School musical production staff for 4 performances. Not to exceed the budget of $50,000, conditioned upon obtaining necessary performance licensing, and to authorize such persons to serve in an uncompensated volunteer capacity until such necessary performance licensing is obtained. Upon the ability to hold, proceed, and conduct extracurricular activities under state orders, such agreement or appointments to be subject to earlier termination based on subsequent state orders. Stipends shall be prorated based on work performed. Professional orchestra musician Marsha Bray, $625. Professional orchestra musician Dakota Cook, $625. Professional orchestra musician Haley Daly, $625. Professional orchestra musician Reagan Daly, $625. Professional orchestra musician Carrie Detweiler, $625. Professional orchestra musician Nina Edgar, $625. Professional orchestra musician Sean Harris, $625. Professional orchestra musician Chris Warnick, $625. Professional orchestra musician Dane Schultz, $625. And professional orchestra musician Dawn Stoner, $625. The questions or objections are elected on the agenda.
Hearing no questions or objections, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request for Central Susquehanna Intermediate Unit Center for Safe School and Communities to conduct a behavioral health climate assessment and written report for Connellsville Area Middle School at a total cost not to exceed $1,700 paid for through easers. No questions or objections are like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing no questions or objections, we'll place that on the agenda.
Request approval of the 21-22 ELL, which is your English Language Learners Participation Form for instruction hours at an estimated cost of $73,739. Last year it was $102,604. No questions or objections, I'd like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request an agreement between Redstone Rehabilitation Services and the Connellsville Area School District to provide physical and occupational therapy to qualified school-age students for 22, 23, and 23 and 24 school year. Questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Request an agreement between Ignite Education Solutions and the Connellsville Area School District to provide speech and language services from January 20th, 2022 until the end of 21-22 school year. Questions or objections, or like that on the agenda?
Hearing none, we'll have that placed on the agenda.
Travel.
It's appropriate for you to say 1 through 8 as presented.
1 through 8 as presented. There's no questions or objections. I like that on the agenda.
No questions or objections, we'll add that to the agenda.
Request approval of Armstrong musical sponsorship in the amount of $2,500 and additional Armstrong programming and advertising, which is estimated value of $10,700 in support of Matilda and the Connellsville High School Musical Club. No objections or questions like that on the agenda?
Hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
We did have a committee meeting on the 13th at 6:45. That's all I have. Mr. Harshman?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Mongiel?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. D'Amico? That's all we have, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sangston. Moving to technology, Mr. Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Panzala. Request approval of the following employee travel. Laura Lambie, Ashley McLaughlin, staff to attend the PDE Data Summit 2022, Hershey, PA, March 20th through March 23rd, 2022, at an approximate cost of $2,425, registration, lodging, meals, and travel as budgeted. Supervisor requested. Any questions or objections? I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Question,
Question?
is there, think there might be some place in maybe Las Vegas or Hawaii be a little cheaper than going to Hershey?
I agree, Mr. Lane.
Oh my, jeez, the whiz. That's all I have.
I think we ought to buy some property out there and build a place.
Yeah, build a house.
Might be cheaper. Okay, hearing no questions or objections. Another question, go to Mrs. Sangston.
As budgeted, where are we getting it budgeted from?
Those two accounts, one is under technology and the other is curriculum.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Another question? No, we're good. Okay, hearing none, we'll add that to the agenda.
21B, addition to the substitute list. Request approval of the following addition to the technology substitute list for the 2021-2022 school year. And I so move.
No questions or
No
objections?
questions or objections?
We'll have that added to the agenda.
21C with a technology committee meeting, January 5th, 2022 at 9 a.m. That's all I have, Mr. Martucci. Yes, sir. Mr. Martray. Mr. Ghost.
Nothing, thank you.
That's all we have, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschman. Moving to transportation, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Mr. Renzi, you have anything?
I have nothing, thanks.
Mr. Evans? That's all we have. Thank you, Mr. Panzella.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Under the President's report, we will be going over voting on the organizational chart, the request of approval revised organizational chart. We'll be voting on that tomorrow night. And also 23B, health and safety plan that will be revised. And I will defer the options and plan to Dr. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Manzella. Those three revisions to be considered can be considered as a group, considered singularly, or considered two at a time. The first revision would be revision of the Collinsville School District masking practice. Number two would be revision of the building-wide notifications when a positive case of coronavirus occurs, with instructions for individuals to monitor for symptoms versus individual letters. The current practice of a building letter and individual letters is our current practice, so we would go to one building-wide letter. And third piece of the revision is the utilization of the emergency instructional time template under PA Code 520.1 via an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding between the Collinsville School District and the Collinsville Education Association as attached. Those are the three separate items to be considered as revisions to our health and safety plan.
We'll be voting on those tomorrow evening. Anything else, Dr. Bradley, on that?
Nothing. Thank you for the opportunity to present that.
Okay. I know Mr. Kirsch is here. I just want to make sure I mention it tomorrow night also. I just want to thank the maintenance guys and custodians. They bust their butt, worked their hump off to get the schools prepared for us to have school today. I did notice they look very good, and I just want to thank them, and I'll make sure I thank them again tomorrow night. I have a few other things tomorrow night that I will mention. Yes?
I'm sorry, this is ordinary. But under the health and safety plan revised, there's nothing on the website that goes into detail about what Mr. Bradley just talked about. I looked for tonight's plan and for tomorrow night's agenda, and it's not in there. It just says health and safety plan revised, so that we can, will that be fixed? Will we get a copy of that?
Those three bullets that I just stated will be listed under the revisions, correct?
It is.
It will be.
It will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I know that was ordinary.
I'm sorry. Is that all? Okay. Yep, so anyway, thank you, Mr. Kirsch. Make sure you thank the gentleman. Also thank him again tomorrow night. Like I said, a few other things maybe tomorrow evening. Next, anything on public comment from our agenda? Nothing? Assistant to the superintendent? Anything? Nothing. Dr. Bradley?
Nothing at this time. Tomorrow I look forward to some comments. Thank you.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.